in the southeast of England. Any showers that do form disappear quickly later in the afternoon, and by the evening, skies clearing across a large part of the UK, but some medium and high-level cloud will affect Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some rain will push into the Northern Isles and the Outer Hebrides, along with a strengthening breeze. A milder night, though, across the northern half of the UK, certainly compared with the last few nights, but in the south, similar temperatures, largely in the double figures and in some places the mid-teens. But we're good to see those mist and fog patches reform overnight, and Sunday starts off with some murkiness. But again, that will lift, and bright skies for most on Sunday, away from the far north, where we'll continue to see some outbreaks of rain and a strong breeze. Sunday, though, is a much warmer day, with temperatures in the mid to high 20s in places, even warmer weather next week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, let's hope we all have a sunny afternoon.
Oh, yeah, fingers crossed. And a lovely week ahead. That'd be nice. We'll be back tomorrow morning, come rain or shine, but Esther and Phil are here next with Saturday Morning Live. Don't go anywhere.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Live with me, Esther and Phil. Now, we're going to be asking today, has common sense broken out in the police? Particularly after Sir Mark Rowley has said that, you know what, police officers, we don't want you woke on duty. We want you to wake up and actually put criminals behind bars. That's our debate today. What do you think?
And it was the end of the transfer deadline in football yesterday. A flurry of activity before the deadline actually happened. Who better to speak to about what that means than former Premier League manager Harry Redknapp, including Liverpool incredibly rejecting a bid from Saudi Arabia of £150 million for 31-year-old Mo Salah.
I'd have said yes. I'd have snapped the hand off rather than holding out for more.
Me too.
And boarding schools, are they great British establishments or are they cruel camps for children? And the after effects, what happens? Are you scarred for life? Philip, where you went? You went to a state boarding school.
I went to a boarding school, and before there's to judge whether I've been scarred for life.
Yeah, well, obviously other kids are going back to school this week. Some will be packed off to boarding school.
And last night we heard the news that Mohammed Al Fayed, the former Harrods owner, former owner of Fulham Football Club, had died aged 94. And of course, what he was incredibly famous for was that whole cash for questions scandal in the 1992 to 97 Parliament, which ended up with people like Neil Hamilton losing his seat in Tatton at the general election. Well, later in the show, we will be speaking to Neil Hamilton about his reaction to the death of Mohammed Al Fayed. No, you certainly don't want to miss that. And of course, we want to hear what you think about all of these subjects. So email us as normal, gbviews@gbnews.com, and we'll read out as many of those comments as possible. But before all of that, here's the news headlines with the fabulous Ray.
Thank you both. Good morning. 2 minutes past 10, our top stories this hour. There are calls for transparency following fears that public sites are at risk of collapsing because of aerated concrete. That's after the Department for Education told more than 100 schools and colleges to partially or fully close buildings as students prepare to return to class. It's estimated that around 24 schools have been told to close in England, but that figure is yet to be confirmed. Experts are warning the danger could extend to include healthcare buildings, courts and offices. Labour is demanding an urgent audit. Well, rail passengers are facing more disruption as train drivers take part in their latest strike today. Up to 20,000 RMT union members of 14 operators have walked out over pay and conditions. Meanwhile, members of the Train Drivers Union ASLEF, who were on picket lines yesterday, are refusing to work overtime today. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told us he's hopeful for next week's negotiations.
We go into those talks with an attitude and a disposition to try and get an agreement, but there are some serious issues, as most people know now. We don't want to be on strike. We'd much rather be earning a living and running the service for the people who need to use it. So hopefully, if we can get a different mindset next week, we can get some progress.
Tributes are being paid to former Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayed, who has died at the age of 94. The family of the Egyptian-born businessman, who also owned Fulham FC for 16 years, says he passed away peacefully of old age. Fulham tweeted saying, "We owe Mohammed a debt of gratitude." Former PR for Mr Al Fayed, Michael Cole, told us why he was so special.
I mean, highly controversial, of course, but those people who actually knew him, who worked for him, who were his customers, who were the fans of his football club, and the many, many, many people who were beneficiaries of his kindness and generosity, they are without number, I can assure you.
The government is looking at ways to make Botox safer amid concerns about subpar procedures. It's launched an 8-week consultation with industry professionals and the public. It comes as an estimated 900,000 Botox injections are carried out in the UK each year. New regulations could include age limits for high-risk procedures and a licensing scheme for practitioners in England. Ashton Collins is the director of Save Face, a government-approved register of accredited practitioners. She told us people are making obvious mistakes.
That's part of the problem, is that people look to things like social media to find cheap deals, and they assume that people are safe and regulated, and so they think the cheap deals are a bargain, but actually most often people are cutting corners, and these unwitting consumers think that they are getting a cheap deal, and actually they end up having complications or unwanted outcomes.
The Home Secretary is commissioning a review into activism and impartiality in the police force. Suella Braverman says it can damage public confidence and officers should focus on tackling crime. She also says she will leave no stone unturned to ensure that policing acts for the benefit of the British public. Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, will be speaking at a rally later calling for Scotland to rejoin the European Union. The event, organised by Believe in Scotland and Yes for EU, will see supporters march on the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. Supporters will be calling for an independent Scotland to, quote, undo the damage of Brexit and rejoin the European family of nations. Well, in the US, body cam footage has been released of the moment that a pregnant black woman was shot by police in an Ohio supermarket car park. Now, a warning for those of you watching on television, the footage we're about to show you includes the moment before and after her death. Well, after being accused of stealing, Takia Young refused to exit her car and drove at one investigating officer with her vehicle. A single shot through the windshield killed the 21-year-old and her unborn daughter. A lawyer for her family is demanding that the officers are held accountable. Both have been placed on administrative leave whilst investigations take place. India has launched its first space-based solar probe to study the sun. The Aditya L1 aims to study solar winds, which can cause disturbances on Earth. It comes just days after it became the first country to land a spacecraft on the unexplored south pole of the moon. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Ray. Now, earlier this week, the Prime Minister had a minor reshuffle of his cabinet following the expected resignation of Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. The new Defence Secretary is Grant Shapps, who was previously Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero.
He is replacing that job by Claire Coutinho, a close ally of the Prime Minister, who is now the 6th Energy Secretary of State since 2020.
But what does this all mean? Joining us now is diary editor for The Spectator, James Heal. So, James, Labour have described that mini reshuffle as just moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. How did you see it?
I think this really was the rishification of the government. Obviously, as we know, Ben Wallace was long signalled that he wanted to stand down at this reshuffle, and so it was kind of forced on the government to replace him. And obviously he'd left a huge legacy, having been seen to make the right calls on Ukraine, having been seen as a real friend of the military, having done that job under 3 prime ministers. So who do you replace him with? And the answer is Grant Shapps. I don't think a particularly surprising choice in some ways. A very able communicator, someone close to the Prime Minister. And for me, the more intriguing choice is who replaces Shapps as Energy Secretary, as you say, which is Claire Coutinho, who is, I think, just 38 years old and the first member of the 2019 intake to reach Cabinet. And this is about, I think, trying to ensure that the kind of talent pipeline continues, and also appointing someone who used to work for the Prime Minister when he was a junior minister and a clear key ally of his, and ensuring they can fight the election on a team which is seen as good communicators and modern-looking faces.
Well, James, you say that the Grant Shapps' appointment wasn't particularly surprising. It did come as a surprise to lots of people. I mean, the Conservative benches are absolutely ram-packed with people who have been in the armed forces or worked in that area or all the rest of it. So was it not a bit of a mistake or a surprise to pick somebody without that previous experience? Will that cause a lot of resentment amongst those former members of the armed forces who are on the Conservative benches, who probably think they're better qualified for the job than he is?
Well, I think that every reshuffle, there is a sense perhaps there are others who feel they're more qualified. But I would say that I think that of the last 13 Defence Secretaries before Ben Wallace, none of them, other than Penny Mordaunt, who was a naval reservist, had military experience. Normally we have a politician's role. I think the key question is about, I think, ability for the job in sense of will Grant Shapps be able to stand up to the Treasury? We all...
Oh.
Well, James has gone. If we get him back, we will. But look, we're delighted to say in the studio with us to go through the top stories of the day, and we'll finish that question about the reshuffle too, is Conservative peer Sean Bailey and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. So following on from that, I mean, I think noses will be out of joint for various reasons, whether they were people who've worked in the armed forces or if it's other people who think, gosh, I was ahead of the queue, you know, from other intakes when they saw a 2019 Claire Coutinho go in.
Yeah, I mean, on the Grant Shapps thing, I do actually think the criticism has been a bit unfair. I mean, our system doesn't work on the basis that you have to be a former soldier to run the Ministry of Defence, any more than you have to be a former doctor to run the Department of Health. And of course, in someone like Liam Fox, we've had a doctor running the Ministry of Defence.
But you might say a year before or thereabouts a general election, you know, you've got to keep all your backbenchers happy as well. They've got to go into that big general election fighting for you, so you don't want any upset there.
No, I understand that, but I mean, it seems to me there's so many factions in the Conservative Party at the moment that whatever you do, you're not going to keep everybody happy.
One more doesn't matter.
Basically.
And of course, Keir Starmer's supposed to be having his own little reshuffle on Monday next week. I mean, is that a surprise? I mean, I would have thought, you know, he's so far ahead in the polls. Why change anything? Why risk upsetting the apple cart? But he seems to be. Is his going to be more wide-ranging than Rishi's or not?
Well, it's a fair point, Phil. I mean, he doesn't have to do anything to win the election at the moment, and that's why he's so incredibly cautious. I think he just needs a few sort of tinkering with the top team. The particular one is Angela Rayner, who's got all sorts of different jobs, and one of the ideas seems to be to give her a department, whether that would be transport to shadow or replace Lisa Nandy at Levelling Up. But it would mean that Angela is not just there criticising, which is what tends to happen if you are...
Where do you think should be better? Shadowing Michael Gove? Did Lisa Nandy not do enough there? Or do you think because of her links with the union she'd be better in the rail department?
I reckon that transport is the right place. I think because of her links with the unions, and we've had so much trouble in transport, that that would be the ideal place for her. Should she want to actually be shadowing the department, of course.
Well, we shall see how all that pans out. Sean, what's your top story?
My top story is the revision to the economics statistics coming out of the pandemic. So the story said that we were the weakest economy in Europe, we'd done such a bad job, Brexit, lockdowns, etc. Turns out somebody got the maths wrong. And we had a very strong growth.
Doesn't fill you with confidence.
It really... and by the way, that somebody was the Office for National Statistics, which we all rely, which is a real shame. And the reason I bring this up is twofold. Firstly, our recovery... Any recovery is based on confidence. And if you get the maths wrong and then the confidence is wrong, then the recovery goes another way. So this seemingly innocuous mistake could have cost us billions. And you're looking at our economy now, you're looking at people's pockets that are really suffering. So it was important to get this right. And I'm astonished. But what it's also done is given the Chancellor a bit of an easy time. Because he's able to say, well, look how good I was doing, you just all didn't know. But for me, the most important thing this Chancellor could do is a tax cut.
What do you think?
So he's got headroom to do a tax cut, and that's what he needs to be doing.
The squeezed middle of this country wants to get out to work, wants to pay their bills, but it all goes to him. He needs to give it back to us.
What do you think about these figures? It does seem quite extraordinary that not only were they out by so much, it was like, I think, 1.8% of GDP, which is a massive error, it seems to me, but also that it took the best part of 2 years to correct these things. I mean, how on earth... I don't understand how this happens.
I'm a bit surprised about that. I think that the size of the figure, bear in mind the contraction of the economy during COVID. Mm-hmm. So when it got back on track again, you would expect the figure to be much higher. I mean, it's obviously good news. I mean, the fact that we're doing better, that's great. But yes, I mean, the ONS could have probably worked this out a bit beforehand, that we weren't as bad as we thought we were.
I think if there's a lesson we can take from this as well, is when you get these figures, instead of them being so definitive by which you either beat somebody or champion somebody else, actually you need to have a little bit more give and take, don't you think?
I do, and I think this has damaged their reputation, because the next time you get figures, I certainly will be like, well, what's the margin of error here? But the really substantial, important thing is these are figures that people ran their businesses on. These are figures that we, Germany were able to say they did better than us, and apparently we did better than them. We were equal
support with France. This is important, but I circle back to the big issue. The cost of living has meant that people in this country are struggling, and this now gives a chance, a little bit more headroom to alleviate that pain.
Slight concern that Jeremy Hunt's still saying, well, look, we've got to keep on inflation, and that, because you do seem to be doing better, could mean interest rates stay stubbornly high for longer.
Well, I really hope not, because what really makes it... Let's be clear, right? We've just talked about a reshuffle. Both of those individuals, Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister, reshuffling for a general election. This Chancellor should be preparing for a general election, and the best thing he could do morally, spiritually and physically is give people a tax cut.
Ooh, I'm against tax cuts until we've got inflation down. I'm actually with the Chancellor on this one, that if you start throwing more money into the economy, that just fuels inflation.
Everything's gone topsy-turvy. You're supporting the government, you're criticising the government. I mean, my whole world's going upside down.
It's topsy-turvy politics.
Are we in Alice in Wonderland? Is that where we've gone?
What's your top story, Nigel?
My top story was Suella Braverman in the Telegraph today, who was talking about stopping woke policing. And I have to say, I feel a bit sorry for the police. Here they are, they've been accused of institutional racism over the years. Will they try and do something about it? They're now getting accused of being woke. And it does seem to me that if you are lowering tensions by taking the knee at a Black Lives Matter protest, dancing with, say, Notting Hill Carnival revellers or Extinction Rebellion protesters, if you give the police the kind of flexibility to do that, that is probably a good thing. And for Suella Braverman to come out and say, no, I don't want them doing this, I want them to be absolutely neutral, not have any kind of expression of a political bias, I think it makes policing worse. Now, that's not to say they should be flying rainbow flags from police cars any more than they should be flying flags from their favourite football team. But the point basically is that policing is a difficult job, and I think you leave it to the front line to decide how best to go about doing it.
We're going to be having a debate about this, actually, coming up very soon with Toby Young and Steve Turner, a Police and Crime Commissioner. So, Sean, I guess the question is, are the police institutionally racist or institutionally woke?
I think, actually, on this one, I disagree heavily with Nigel, because the problem is any side you back. So let's say you take the knee, half the country go yay, and the other say no. And what you've done is, in some people's mind, is said the police are against me. And a strict line of neutrality allows everybody to be upset with the police or nobody to be upset with the police. But that's better than some people, rabidly against the police. And, of course, you then expose yourself to the politics of said organisation. Now, it might seem strange to lots of people watching this, but I wouldn't support Black Lives Matter because of some of the things they wrote on their website about destroying the nuclear family, etc., etc. Now, if I think the police are supporting Black Lives Matter, I might begin to have a problem with them. So I actually think she's right on this. They should be rabidly neutral and nothing else.
I agree with that. I think the fact is you need to get on with your job at hand and not be getting involved in maybe other causes. But as Phil said, it can be a tricky line for the police to follow. Engagement, because they do need engagement with the public, or doing the crimes. Phil, you've got a bit of a fun story, a lighter story. I was trying to reach across surreptitiously to get the sun, but I don't think I did.
I've got a fun story for this hour and a fun story for the next hour. This is my one for this hour. Page 18 of The Sun. Snakes and ladders fans are the biggest love rats, survey suggests. A poll found those who loved playing the game were most likely to cheat. Monopoly players, however, were the most faithful. This was a survey by dating site Illicit Encounters. So relationship expert Jessica Leone said, next time you and your partner decide to bring out a board game, you might want to keep an eye on what they suggest playing. So I guess the big question here, Nigel, is, are you a snakes and ladders man or a Monopoly man?
Well, I mean, I'm neither, actually. Our family is a Pass the Pigs family, so...
Well, pass the what?
Pass the Pigs. So,
not a parcel.
So I'm not quite sure what that actually labels us as.
Sean, are you a Monopoly man or...
Oh, no, in my house we play Catan. So, look, that probably... Is that...
Wait, everybody's got weird games. What's Catan? I've got a Pass a Pig, I've got a Catan.
Yeah, Settlers of Catan's a world-famous game. But back to your survey. The thing about the survey, I wonder if it's almost like a psychometric test. People who play Monopoly are nesters. They like to feather their nest and build. And
buy in Mayfair.
Exactly. And people who play snakes and ladders, you know, like the thrill, up and down, you know, like to gamble.
See, I like Ludo. So I don't know where that fits in. I'm going to have to look at this survey in more detail.
You know what? I'm going to go to Kaplunk.
Yeah, fair enough. That's safe.
Let us know what your favourite game is and what that says about you. gbviews@gbnews.com. But Nigel, Sean, thank you very much for dodging that bullet there that I threw to you at the end. We'll see you in the next hour.
We certainly will. Now, coming up, is common sense finally returning to the police force after Met Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley's comments earlier this week? We'll be debating this with Police and Crime Commissioner Steve Turner and Toby Young of Free Speech Union. You certainly don't want to miss that one.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. The time now is 10:24. We've got some of your views here. Go on.
No, well, not much support for Grant Shapps' appointment as Secretary of State for Defence, it has to be said.
We'll read out the kindest ones, or the kindest two.
Alex says the man has no experience in the military at a time when we need our best. Shocking choice.
And Annabelle says it's hard to imagine the question to which the answer is Grant Shapps.
They were the politest
and
ones.
they were the politest ones. They were the kindest ones to him. But keep your views coming in. Now, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley has said he will take the wokeness out of policing.
Speaking to The Telegraph, he said there are very few causes policing should be attached to and that officers should refrain from expressing or acting upon their political beliefs while on duty.
So is common sense returning to the police? Joining us now to discuss this is Police and Crime Commissioner Steve Turner and Toby Young, General Secretary of the Free Speech Union. So, Steve Turner, have the police turned into the woke brigade and the thought police? And was Mark Rowley right to say we need to get rid of all that and get back to impartiality in policing?
Good morning, Esther. That's not something I see in my force. I don't see a lot of wokeness in my force, but I do agree with Mark Rowley's sentiment. I do think there is too much pressure put on police officers in today's society to be all things to all people, and he's dead right in saying we must be absolutely apolitical in the police force, because we're there to serve everybody, to protect everybody, but also everybody needs to know that we're there to support them as well.
I mean, the thing is, Steve, it seems to me a strange one here. The rank-and-file police officers that I come across in my constituency, they always seem like very sensible, down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth kind of people, to be perfectly honest, not in any way woke. And yet we see police officers not investigating burglaries, but turning up mob-handed when a pub displays a gollywog, or when a 16-year-old girl says that a police officer looks like a lesbian, and they come in mob-handed for that kind of thing. I mean, what's happening what's happening here? I mean, it seems to me, is this the leadership of the police that's causing these things? And in which case, isn't Mark Rowley the one who's to blame, rather than blaming it on the rank-and-file officers?
I absolutely agree. It's not the rank-and-file officers' fault. They will be dispatched to where they're told to be dispatched to. But what I do think is those sensationalised stories are few and far between, and what we don't see, because it doesn't make headline news, is the 99% of jobs that the police will attend where they're not misgendering somebody, or they're not going down the woke agenda or something along those lines. So, but I do think leadership is a big thing, and what people in my position need to do, and our chief constables, is set that standard and make sure that we're not just pandering to whoever's shouting loudest on a particular day or at a particular event. But we've also got to recognise that the police officer's job is to keep people safe, and sometimes inflaming an event isn't the right thing to do. So it is absolutely, you're dead right, Phil, it is absolutely about leadership, and PCCs and chief constables and senior officers need to lead from the front, and we need to say, let's do what we're paid to do. Let's do what the public want us to do, because the public want us to attend every burglary, attend every car crime.
Let's bring in Toby here. Let's bring in Toby. You know, could the police have a defence here, pushed and pulled from one direction to the other, trying to engage with the community, trying to be all things to all people, but fundamentally they have taken the eye off the ball. And as Suella Braverman says, you know, it's damaging the public trust in policing, that they're getting caught up in trivia and not the real crime.
Yeah, well, like Steve, I certainly wouldn't blame the rank-and-file officers, most of whom I'm sure are very sensible and don't want to be investigating people for supposedly saying something offensive on Twitter. It's the leadership that's at fault, and I'd identify the College of Policing as being probably the centre of the rot. It was the College of Policing which introduced the concept of non-crime hate incidents in 2014. And according to research carried out by the Free Speech Union, we estimate about 250,000 non-crime hate incidents have been recorded in England and Wales alone. That's an average of about 70 a day, Esther. Why are the police investigating tweets instead of policing our streets? There were a couple of examples just last week. A woman in West Yorkshire was arrested for taking a picture of a sticker, a gender-critical sticker, on Happy Valley Pride on a poster advertising Happy Valley Pride. We had the Conservative councillor in Northamptonshire who was arrested for having reposted a video on Twitter of a Christian preacher being arrested, which the police later admitted was a case of wrongful arrest. So I think that's probably the first example of the police wrongfully arresting someone for pointing out that the police had previously wrongfully arrested someone. These aren't isolated incidents, I'm afraid. I wish they were, Steve. I'm afraid this is the pattern we're seeing across the country. It's not burglaries investigating, but bad tweets.
Look, the police in this country police by consent. They rely on good relationships with the community to get intelligence, to get people to come forward to report crimes and things like that, and to give them information that will lead to the arrest of senior criminals, severe criminals. So if developing these good relationships with people in the community involves taking the knee, for example, is there really a big problem with that?
I think the problem with taking the knee, Phil, is that it alienates people who don't share that hard left neo-Marxist BLM agenda. If the police take sides on these very divisive, politically contentious issues, whether it's promoting pride, dancing with Extinction Rebellion protesters, going down on one knee in front of protesters, it doesn't build public confidence in the police, even within those communities. It undermines it. It suggests that the police have become the paramilitary wing of The Guardian. And if you're not a Guardian reader, that makes you feel you might be arrested at any moment.
Steve, what about Toby's point here about non-crime hate incidents? I mean, isn't it absolutely bizarre that the police should be investigating things that are called non-crimes? I thought the police were in post in order to investigate crimes and bring criminals to justice. So shouldn't people like police and crime commissioners be telling the police not to waste the time where it's a non-crime and just stick to crimes?
I would agree with that. I think it's not about non-crimes, it is about crimes. And it's up to chief constables to direct operational policing. The police and crime commissioners set the strategy. But I think the interesting thing from what Toby said there is too often groups, other politicians, political supporters use the police to try and target people who they see as their opponents. And I've been a victim of that myself here in Cleveland. And we've got a responsibility as politicians, and you two will know better than anybody, that you can't suddenly jump up and down about an issue because your political opponent, if you see an advantage about targeting your political opponent. So I've known politicians kneel for Black Lives Matter. I've seen police officers say they would only kneel before God, their king, and their wife. And I would personally take that view. But I do think too often we politicise these things and we try and bring the police in to make a point and attack a political opponent.
Well, then I think we've come full circle in the debate that we need to go back to taking all of these
other politicians about woke agendas.
Yeah, I think we've come back full circle. We need to take all of these, the woke agenda out of policing and just get back to policing. No rainbow flags, no badges, no taking the knee, just locking up criminals. Thank you both very much indeed, Toby Young there and Steve Turner. Also looking at the figures, Phil, since 2010, the number of police officers have gone up by 2.6%, but crime's gone up by 25%. That's probably because they're not doing what they should be doing. Let's hear from you. And coming up, boarding school. Some say it was the best thing that ever happened to them. Some say it was the worst. Phil has got some strong feelings about this, haven't you? Haven't gone to state boarding school yourself.
Yeah, well, you know, I hated the first year, loved the rest of the time, but it's for others to judge whether it did me good or not, I suspect, rather than for me.
That's what we'll be talking about after the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's what we've been waiting almost 2 months for, but finally we've got a weekend with high pressure that's in charge. It's built its way in from the Atlantic and it's going to remain in place throughout Saturday and Sunday. Despite that, there has been a fair amount of cloud around first thing this morning. It is slowly clearing its way off and will allow more in the way of sunshine this afternoon, but some of the sunshine could be hazy at times. I'm afraid I can't rule out the odd shower across parts of England and Wales, but most of us should stay largely dry, and with light winds for many of us as well. It will be feeling pleasantly warm, climbing to highs of 25 degrees Celsius across the southeast, 21, 22 degrees central belt of Scotland and Northern Ireland. We'll be turning cloudier and breezier though for northwest Scotland as this area of rain begins to push its way in overnight. Could provide some heavy outbursts for the Isle of Lewis, parts of Shetland and Orkney as well. Elsewhere, a generally dry night, some clear spells, but mist and fog developing once again, particularly across central eastern areas of England, and quite a mild night for many of us, not dropping below 12 or 13 degrees Celsius in most towns and cities. Once that early mist and fog does clear its way off tomorrow, it should be a fairly fine day once again and a good dose of sunshine across the bulk of England and Wales. A bit cloudier for Northern Ireland and also still lingering rain and cloud across parts of northwest Scotland as well. Where you're in that shelter though, further east, 23 to 26 degrees Celsius possible. And it's only set to get warmer as we head towards the middle part of next week, 29, perhaps 30 degrees Celsius. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast, right across the day, breaking the latest stories, and every evening. And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country, with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:38. Lots of you have been getting in touch, particularly about woke police or not. Jane says the police are too busy with woke policy to care. We recently got burgled and my jewellery was stolen. The police weren't interested useless. And Andy says the job of the police is to arrest criminals, not massage anybody's feelings.
And we did a poll and we did ask, after what Mark Rowley had said, that really frontline officers need to be impartial, they shouldn't be taking the knee, flying rainbow flags, they should be fighting crime. We asked, do you have confidence the police will stop being so woke? Well, only 7% of you said yes. 93% of you said no, we won't, you know, have confidence that the police will stop now being so woke. Well, that's damning, isn't it?
It is. So people don't really believe that Mark Rowley is going to make any difference. Or maybe don't believe that he really means it. One or the other, I suppose. We'll have to see. Proof of the pudding will be in the eating.
Anyway, back to school next week, and some kids will be packed off to boarding school, just like you were.
I remember it very well. However, is going to boarding school a good thing and character building, or is it cruel and can have a significant negative effect on children?
Well, joining us now to discuss the pros and cons of boarding school is Tom Buick, a Professor of Education Policy, and Piers Cross, who runs a group for ex-boarders who have struggled since leaving school. So I guess my question is, I'll start with you, Tom, that, you know, the question we put out, and we put this out to a poll to our viewers, is it a great educational establishment or is it a cruel camp for kids?
Just to clarify, I mean, I support care leavers, not necessarily those who've been to boarding schools. Some may have been there, but I think the key point really in the question you're asking me is, can these educational settings be supportive to the emotional skills and resilience of young people? And, you know, the fact is the educational psychological research on this is mixed. There are some who argue that there is such a thing as boarding school syndrome. There are other very learned professors, far more learned than I on this subject, who actually conclude that there's no evidence that there's a direct cause between the emotional skills and the psychological condition of adults just because they went to boarding school. I'm afraid actually what this is really about is good parenting. Where there's good parenting, where there's supportive emotional environments in the home and beyond the home, then actually we know that young people turn into flourishing adults. That's really the issue here.
Piers, let's bring you in here. You went to a boarding school and you support others who did go to boarding school. What is the damage they do to people?
Yeah, I mean, if I come back to my own personal experience, on the surface, I was seen as a success. Athletics captain in a rock band, and I went on to work in the...
Oh, we've lost Piers there, so we go back to Tom. But he obviously was about to tell us, you know, any trauma he'd had. So I'm going to ask you, while Piers isn't here, Phil, did you think you had any trauma going to a boarding school?
No, not really. I don't think I had any trauma. I mean, I was really unhappy for the first year and I wanted to leave. I was 13 and I wanted to leave and I hated every minute of it, really. But after the first year, I really enjoyed it. And I suppose in that sense, it's horses for courses.
And you see, I read all those Enid Blyton books, Mallory Tower, St. Clair's, and I was desperate to go there. But I think Piers is back. There I was, sold how wonderful it would be with midnight feasts and all your friends around you, Piers. But you're telling me it wasn't like that at all for you.
No, so I had a breakdown and then I realised that my boarding school experience had been pretty horrific. You know, as a 14-year-old, I'd been very depressed. A friend committed suicide. And then the school sent us for grief counselling to the priest who sexually abused me. So, yeah, that was my experience. I learned to dissociate my emotions. And I think it doesn't create resilience, boarding school. It creates dissociation.
Piers, that was a lot of horrible things that happened to you. And I don't know if then that was just your school, if that was boarding schools, because what you've catalogued there is one horrible incident after another.
Yeah, so...
I was going to say, Piers, is that though not really about boarding school? That's just about terrible teachers in a terrible environment, rather than boarding school per se.
Yeah, Piers was about to answer.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in researching for today, I've looked through about 15 different autobiographies. You know, John Peel was raped at boarding school. Richard Branson was sexually abused at boarding school. Bear Grylls said, when I hit boarding school, suddenly all I felt was fear. Stephen Fry prisons are like boarding schools. So there's, I think, yes, my school, but there are actually many schools which are very similar.
Tom, I guess it's horses for courses, really, with all these things. That's for some people it will be you know, for good, and for some people it will be terrible. How do you think that parents can work out whether boarding school will be good for their children or not?
I think it's important to understand why parents might find themselves in a position that they actually have to send their children to boarding school. You know, we have a very advanced diplomatic service in this country. It's just not possible for children to follow their parents around in every single country that they go to. So that may be a reason to send children to boarding school. I think we also need to get it into perspective. There are 27,000 schools, state and private schools in the United Kingdom. There are about 500 boarding schools, of which about 40 of those are state boarding schools. And, you know, not in any way to undermine what Piers has just outlined there in terms of his own personal trauma. Look, my parents separated at the age of 6. I was in foster care for all of my childhood. It's a form, if you like, of institutional care. They weren't my parents. As it happens, actually, probably the best thing that ever happened to me. I've grown up, I've flourished with my own family. Actually, I believe that what that experience gave me was resilience in life, a sort of sense of I could cope with any adversity or challenge that was put in front of me. But I do accept and respect that there's no one experience is the same as the next personal experience. And I think, you know, the challenge here is around, is boarding school the cause of some of these traumas that Piers has outlined, including his own? And I think, you know, we need to look at the academic research on this, and it's very mixed. Actually, you know, the latest research that's come out, and it's probably the largest sample of ex-boarders, shows that actually parenting skills, emotion in the home, not necessarily what's going on inside the boarding school, is the cause of some of these.
Can I just very quickly, with the people that you deal with, I just wondered how many of the people that have had problems were forced into going to boarding school against their will, and how many chose to go to boarding school? I was lucky that my parents gave me the choice and said, do you want to go? And I said, yeah, I want to go. It was my choice. And I just wondered, do you see a difference between those where the children were involved in the decision-making to go and those where they weren't involved in that decision?
Not really.
Yeah,
I see that about 10 to 20.
Tom, let me bring Piers in there.
Yeah, so for me, I'd say 10 to 20% of people who go to boarding schools thrive. You know, it doesn't, you know, Minnie Driver in her biography this year, she says, and so I start boarding, age 8. It is a terrible mistake. It is in the top 3 worst mistakes I will ever make. She made that choice.
Okay.
So I think it does affect, you know, whether you choose or not.
Tom Buick, Piers Cross, thank you both very much indeed for joining us and engaging in that debate, which I find fascinating for obvious reasons.
And here's me wanting to go.
Have you changed your mind now? Do you think are you glad now you didn't go after hearing what Piers had to say?
Well, no, look, Piers had a traumatic time at school, without doubt. But, as I said, I was reading those Enid Blyton books and I wanted to go.
You've done a poll on this,
I have,
haven't you?
Indeed, if you want to do this. And then I will look at the poll. We have got a poll. I think we might even have a...
We asked if you wanted to send your child to a boarding school. There it is. Just over 69% of you said you would not send your child to a boarding school, and about 31% of you would. So there you go. Are you surprised by that?
No, I still think... that's why I said, is it a great establishment? Is it character building? Has it got all these positive things? But I think you were right. If a child doesn't want to go, maybe it's not place.
I think I left boarding school a better person than when I arrived. That's my personal opinion. Other people may disagree. I've opened myself up to be shot down there, but I think I left there as a better person, even though I wasn't.
What did you learn? Any specific skills?
No, it wasn't that. I just...
Can't change your plug. I thought you might have learned that. Not practical at all.
Anyway,
but yeah,
let's not get into all that. Anyway, now to the latest football news. Last night, the summer football transfer window closed, but there was a flurry of activity, as always.
Premier League clubs have spent around a record £2 billion on players in the summer transfer window, according to reports.
Well, who better to speak to than former Premier League football manager Harry Redknapp. Harry, thanks for joining us. You must have seen a few
transfer deadlines in your time. Before we get into the specifics of last night, I just wondered how stressful a time is transfer deadline day for a manager, and is it as chaotic as it looks, or is it more planned than it appears on face value?
No, it is very chaotic, and it's stressful when you're in a position where you're desperate for players. If you're in a relegation, you look at your team and you think, well, we're struggling. We need 2 or 3 players to get, to give us a chance of staying up this year. And you're doing your best, and suddenly the deal falls through, or you're selling somebody to try to get the money to get somebody else in. So it is and it is chaotic. Yeah, everyone's sitting there ordering takeaway pizzas or whatever you're ordering, all sitting around, and phones are going, and people are trying to get something done at the last minute. It's crazy, really. Yeah.
You see, when a club buys a new player, that I support Bradford City. I always get this thing. It says, we've been tracking this player for weeks or months or whatever. I'm getting the impression from you, Harry, that it's like we need a striker who's available, anyone will do, kind of thing.
Yeah, but if you've been tracking him for months, it's crazy, really. Why don't we sign him a month earlier? It's like we wait until transfer deadline day, until the last minute. I think people enjoy. A lot of people would seem to really enjoy it and get a kick out of it. I was at Tottenham. Daniel Levy was the master of the transfer deadline day. He would always get a deal done somewhere. Daniel, I knew yesterday when he was after the lad Johnson at Notts Forest, he would get the deal done somehow. And 1 or 2 went out on loan, and he loves that day. It's amazing how chaotic, and everyone's running around. And 11 o'clock goes, and everyone's just let's have a glass of wine and relax.
Well, one deal that didn't get done yesterday, couldn't believe it, Mo Salah at Liverpool, there he were, offered £150 million for it, hanging out maybe for more money. What would you have done in that situation? Would you have sold him?
Well, I think it's crazy money. I think they were prepared to go to more money, and I think Mo Salah, they're talking about his wages being £1.5 million a week. I mean, it's unreal, isn't it? Back in the day when somebody got sold for £1 million, and it was I think Trevor Francis was the first £1 million footballer, and everybody thought, this is crazy. This £1 million for a footballer. Now we're talking about giving him £1.5 million a week. I don't think that deal is dead yet. I mean, that deal could still happen because their window in Saudi is still open. So they can still come back. They've got a week or 10 days or whatever to still come back and try to get a deal done for Mo Salah. And I think the interesting thing is that we haven't heard Mo Salah, I don't think, come out and say, I don't want to go, I want to stay at Liverpool. So it makes you wonder. I would think deep down he probably looks at that deal and thinks, yeah, it's too good to turn down.
What do you make of what's happened at Chelsea, Harry? They seem to be spending money as if it's going out of fashion in every transfer window that comes along. They've spent a fortune on Cole Palmer from Man City, who looks like a cracking player. But how difficult is it to integrate all of these new players every time there's a transfer window?
It's impossible. I mean, that is the big problem, the hard job that Pochettino's got now, is to try to sort a team out. Because what happens, I remember speaking to Frank Lampard when he was at Chelsea, he said, we have a practice match, we have 11 against 11, and there's 8 players who are not able to get into that 22, who are probably internationals and big-time players. So they're really upset. They've got the ump. They're not happy. You take that 8, you bring that 8 on half time, take 8 off. The 8 you take off are now got the needle. They're not happy with you. He said it's impossible. You don't need that. I think Pochettino, as a manager, would much rather, I know from his record, he'd rather work with a small squad, maybe, where 18 players, where he knows what he's got, he knows his best team, he's got his... And I think that's important. Otherwise, it becomes a mess. And I think that's what they're in now.
Can I ask a quick question? Who was the best player who slipped through your fingers, and who was your best transfer you ever did?
I would think Eden Hazard. I should have got Eden Hazard when I was at Tottenham. I went to watch him quite a few times, and he was an amazing player. Ended up at Chelsea. He was a world-class footballer when he came to Chelsea. So he was a big loss. I would think probably Paolo Di Canio was a great signing for me when I was at West Ham. He was an amazing player, and we got him in, and he's became a massive star at West Ham. We all loved him. He was incredible talent.
Harry, thank you ever so much. We'll keep asking you about football. What we're not going to ask you about is jet washing the flowers, which is in the paper today that you've damaged all the flowers at home because you jet washed them and damaged all the petals. So we won't be asking you about gardening. But
no, we will. Go on. What did you do? Have you destroyed them? Is Sandra speaking to you? Is Sandra still speaking to you?
And you. Bye-bye.
There we go.
The answer is Sandra wasn't speaking to him after he just washed those flowers and ruined them.
Still to come, we'll be speaking to UKIP leader Neil Hamilton to get his thoughts after the passing of Mohammed Al-Fayed. You certainly won't want to miss that, I suspect.
And after the case of the evil baby killer, Lucy Letby, are people born evil or is it just upbringing that turns them that way? Is it nature or nurture?
Lots more coming up. First, here's the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's what we've been waiting almost 2 months for, but finally we've got a weekend with high pressure that's in charge. It's built its way in from the Atlantic and it's going to remain in place throughout Saturday and Sunday. Despite that, there has been a fair amount of cloud around first thing this morning. It is slowly clearing its way off and will allow more in the way of sunshine this afternoon, but some of the sunshine could be hazy at times. I'm afraid I can't rule out the odd shower across parts of England and Wales, but most of us should stay largely dry and with light winds for many of us as well. It will be feeling pleasantly warm, climbing to highs of 25 degrees Celsius across the southeast, 21, 22 degrees central belt of Scotland and Northern Ireland. We'll be turning cloudier and breezier though for northwest Scotland as this area of rain begins to push its way in overnight. Could provide some heavy outbursts for the Isle of Lewis, parts of Shetland and Orkney as well. Elsewhere, a generally dry night, some clear spells, but mist and fog developing once again, particularly across central eastern areas of England, and quite a mild night for many of us, not dropping below 12 or 13 degrees Celsius in most towns and cities. Once that early mist and fog does clear its way off tomorrow, it should be a fairly fine day once again and a good dose of sunshine across the bulk of England and Wales. A bit cloudier for Northern Ireland and also still lingering rain and cloud across parts of northwest Scotland as well. Where you're in that shelter though, further east, 23 to 26 degrees Celsius possible. And it's only set to get warmer as we head towards the middle part of next week, 29, perhaps 30 degrees Celsius.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil. Now, Prince Harry, he can't help himself, can he? He's meant to be doing a documentary about the Invictus Games, but no, he's got to get the boot into the royal family, into the media, into the military. We'll be speaking to royal expert Charles Ray about that.
And after the awful case of baby killer Lucy Letby, we've been asking, are people born evil or do they become evil? I guess it's the question that every parent always wants to know the answer to. Is it nature or is it nurture? Well, we'll be discussing that, debating that with two psychologists.
And Mohammed Al Fayed passed away almost 26 years to the day to his son and Princess Diana. We'll be speaking to Neil Hamilton, who has a very particular memories about him and the cash for questions situations back in the 90s.
And as ever, we'll be ending the show with sport and showbiz with the wonderful Aidan McGee and Hayley Palmer. We'll be getting all the latest gossip and news from them. And of course, as always, we want to hear from you, so please email us with your views on all of those subjects, gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, here's the headlines with Ray.
Thanks both. It's 1 minute past 11, our top stories this hour. There are calls for transparency following fears that public sites are at risk of collapsing because of aerated concrete. It's after the Department for Education told more than 100 schools and colleges to partially or fully close buildings as students prepare to return to class. It's estimated around 24 schools have been told to close in England, but that figure is yet to be confirmed. Experts are warning the danger could extend to include healthcare buildings, courts and offices. Labour is demanding an urgent audit. Rail passengers are facing more disruption as train drivers take part in their latest strike action. Up to 20,000 RMT union members at 14 operators have walked out today over pay and conditions. Meanwhile, members of the train drivers' union ASLEF, who were on picket lines yesterday, are refusing to work overtime today. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told us he is hopeful for next week's negotiations.
We go into those talks with an attitude and a disposition to try and get an agreement, but there are some serious issues, as most people know now. We don't want to be on strike. We'd much rather be earning a living and running the service for the people who need to use it. So hopefully, if we can get a different mindset next week, we can get some progress.
Tributes are being paid to former Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayed, who died at the age of 94. The family of the Egyptian-born businessman, who also owned Fulham FC for 16 years, say he passed away peacefully of old age. On its site, Fulham posted, "We owe Mohammed a debt of gratitude." Former spokesperson for Mr Al Fayed, Michael Cole, told us why he was so special.
I mean, highly controversial, of course, but those people who actually knew him, who worked for him, who were his customers, who were the fans of his football club, And the many, many, many people who were beneficiaries of his kindness and generosity, they are without number, I can assure you.
Well, in the US, body cam footage has been released of a pregnant black woman being shot by police in Ohio. Now, warning for those of you watching on television, the footage we're about to show you includes the moment before and after her death. 21-year-old Takia Young refused to leave her car after being accused of stealing and was seen moving her vehicle towards one of the officers. A single shot through the windshield killed the mother of two and her unborn daughter. A family lawyer says her death was unavoidable and is demanding the officers are held accountable. Both have been placed on administrative leave while an investigation takes place. Well, here, the Home Secretary is commissioning a review into activism and impartiality in the police. Suella Braverman says it can damage public confidence and officers should focus on tackling crime. She also says she will leave no stone unturned to ensure policing acts for the benefit of the British public. The government is looking at ways to make Botox safer amid concerns about subpar procedures. It's launched an 8-week consultation with industry professionals and the public. Comes as an estimated 900,000 Botox injections are carried out in the UK each year. New regulations could include age limits for high-risk procedures and a licensing scheme for practitioners in England. Ashton Collins is the director of Save Face, a government-approved register of accredited practitioners. She told us people are making obvious mistakes.
That's part of the problem, is that people look to things like social media to find cheap deals, and they assume that people are safe and regulated, and so they think the cheap deals are a bargain, but actually most often people are cutting corners, and these unwitting consumers think that they are getting a cheap deal, and actually they end up having complications or unwanted outcomes.
Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, will be speaking at a rally later, calling for Scotland to rejoin the European Union. The event, organised by Believe in Scotland and Yes for EU, will see supporters march on the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. Supporters will be calling for an independent Scotland to, quote, undo the damage of Brexit and rejoin the European family of nations. And India has launched its first space-based solar probe to study the sun. The Aditya L1 aims to study solar winds, which can cause disturbances on Earth. It comes just days after it became the first country to land a spacecraft on the unexplored south pole of the moon. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Ray. It was reported last night that Mohammed Al Fayed, former owner of Harrods and Fulham Football Club, has died at the age of 94. He was, of course, also famous for Cash for Questions and for his libel case against former MP Neil Hamilton. Well, Neil joins us now. Neil, thanks for joining us. I mean, obviously, you had a long run-in with Mohammed Al Fayed in the 1990s. So how are you feeling about the news of his death this morning?
Well, Michael Cole spoke of one side of this man earlier on as convivial and generous and outgoing, but I experienced a rather different side, the psychopathic liar who would stop at nothing to seek to get revenge on people, very often, and indeed it was in my case, for imagined slights upon him. And the whole Cash for Questions saga was an invention of his on the spur of the moment after he lost a case in the European Court of Human Rights, whereby he sought to overturn a government report which has accused him of fraud and lying in order to take Harrods over in the first place. I was the Corporate Affairs Minister at the time that the European Court came to that decision, and because I'd supported him in the battle to take over Harrods against Tiny Rowland, who was a bitter enemy of the Thatcher government at the time, he thought that I should use my powers as Corporate Affairs Minister to overturn the report. Well, obviously, there's no way I could even handle any of the questions which related to him because of my previous partiality. And he saw that as the ultimate betrayal. And so I and Michael Howard and numerous other Tory MPs found ourselves in the headlights when Fayed accused us all of fraud. we didn't know then, but subsequently have come to know, that this was a tactic he employed against anybody who he thought had crossed him, including many senior employees of Harrods and House of Fraser. People like Christoph Betterman, who was the managing director of Harrods, was accused of fraud and was arrested as a result of the head of Harrods Security, former Chief Superintendent McNamara, who's dead now, had used his contacts to get people arrested in these vendettas. It's all recorded in Tom Bauer's biography of Fayed.
Neil, obviously, he's no longer here in order to sort of put his side of the story on that. But, of course, it was a court that found against you and in favour of him. So what would you say to people who say, well, hold on a minute, this is now you trying to rewrite history after he's died?
Well, I've put my side of the story out, and the Inland Revenue went through all my financial affairs over 20 years with a fine-tooth comb, and everything was in apple pie order. They didn't accept the allegations that he'd made against me, which were completely unfounded, and there was no documentary or other evidence to support them. Libel cases are dangerous things because court cases have a capacity to go awry. And in the atmosphere of the time, looking back on it now, this was 1998, 1999, the Conservative government was as unpopular then as it is now. So in those circumstances, who knows what was in the mind of the jury, that they don't give reasons for their decisions. All I would say is that there was no evidence against me apart from the word of 2 or 3 of Fayed's closest employees.
Neil, obviously this destroyed your political career at that time. Have you ever reconciled with that yourself?
Oh, I've certainly reconciled with that. It opened, new doors and new vistas to us leaving Parliament in 1997. If ever there was a time not to be Tory MP, that was it. When Tony Blair was in his pomp and prime. But I didn't obviously want to lose the election in 1997. Or if I hadn't, maybe you wouldn't be MP for Tatton now, sadly, Esther. You are my
every cloud has a silver lining. What can I tell you? Every cloud has a silver lining. But look, it put you on a very different track in life, didn't it?
I couldn't be more delighted, by the way, that you are my successor in Tatton. It did put me down a new track in life. We did all sorts of extraordinary things like, I learned to dance down a staircase in 6-inch stiletto heels and a basque in the Rocky Horror Show, for example.
What you do in your spare time's up to you.
Neil, I just wondered, it's customary when people die that somebody says something nice about them. Have you got anything positive or nice at all to say about Mohammed Al-Fayed?
Well, as I said earlier, he was a Jekyll and Hyde character. There was a Dr. Jekyll, as Michael Cole spoke about earlier on. Superficially, and this is how he was when I first got to know him, he was convivial and open-hearted, and he was generous to charities. I'm sure he did a lot of good in life, but there was the other flip side of that coin as well, which I spoke about earlier on. Of course, I'm sorry for his family. No doubt they loved him. But there are a lot of people who rue the day that they ever came into contact with Mohammed Fayed, because what he did to me, he did to lots of other people.
Neil Hamilton, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us this morning. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Didn't pull any punches.
No,
there.
you wouldn't expect him to, really, would you, to be honest?
It was. But look, to go through the top stories of the day, and I'm sure they'll have something to say about that. We're delighted to be joined again by Conservative peer Sean Bailey and GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. So there you go. What did you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, Neil certainly didn't hold his punches back, did he, on the basis of that? But obviously,
but two characters, a Jekyll and a Hyde, you say.
I think so.
And if anybody crossed his path, he saw.
And that was certainly his reputation at the time, that if you crossed his path, you're in real trouble. I think that
well, by his own admission, he was bribing MPs. That was his contention.
That's right.
So and he sort of self-confessed that he was involved in.
It was one of the things that ruined John Major's government. I mean, John Major tried doing his back to basics to have a decent sort of government, and then there was this scandal and a load of sex scandals at the same time.
Sean, what story do you want to discuss?
So I'm talking about the concrete time bomb ticking. So for those who are not aware, the government have now written to a number of schools and said you have to check your building for a certain type of concrete. And this concrete has apparently 80% air with some iron bars for it. It was largely used in the 50s through the 70s, but there's a real risk of collapse of these parts of schools. And now it's started in schools, and one of the strange decisions the government's made, they haven't named the schools publicly who need to have a look at their building.
Two are in my constituency.
Now, the thing is, if they haven't named them because the schools want privacy, that's fine. But if it's for any other reason, it's making them look like they're up to something, which is a shame, because actually their response has been very swift. If you read some of the stories, people are trying to suggest almost that the government built these schools. They didn't. The government is responsible for these schools and responsible for the law around them. So they've written to schools, but now the expansion is this in a number of public buildings, maybe in hospitals, courts, etc. So there's a lot of people frantically checking around if they have this concrete. But I think there's two things to consider. One, the government isn't responsible for everything. We live in this world where any little thing, and people say what the government's doing about it, a lot of this will be the actual responsibility of people who own and operate the building. And secondly is the government have taken steps, but it's what they do in the long term. Because a number of these schools who have this concrete are actually in poor states of repair anyway, and probably could do with a whole new building. Where are we going to find the money to do that? Because I know Nigel isn't fond of my tax cutting idea, but all the money the government has to find makes my tax cut even less likely to happen.
Fun enough, I picked up on some of those in different newspapers. One was what Lord Frost had to say in The Telegraph. You know, why aren't we building things like we did in the Victorian times? Yeah. Brilliant, and now they're not, everything's crumbling. But then I also looked at why did we come up with this new RAAC concrete? It was because, one, it was lighter, it had good geothermals, and it was cheaper. And I think we've got to think about that as we're going forward, and people are saying, oh, think about the environment, concrete's bad for the environment, this one would have been better, it would have been lighter. You've got to think about this. Do we want something robust, long-lasting, or do you want something cheaper, more flexible, but only has a lifespan of 30, 40 years? Particularly the Green Lobby would be going for something with a lighter, better geothermics.
But, I mean, this wasn't about anything to do with the Green Lobby, so it was...
no, I said, but where did the concrete come from? They were looking at new and different forms of concrete.
And I think the word cheaper is probably the one that actually sold it to the people who are using it. I take Sean's point. I think that all these schools should be named. I think parents need to know that their school is not one of those there. What Labour are calling for is an audit of all public buildings now to see if this lightweight, bubbly concrete has been used in them. The trouble about that is we're talking about something that will be rather like removing cladding after Grenfell. It's going to be a huge job to actually do. But you do wonder, everyone's got dirty hands on this. There's no government that comes out of it well. We've known there's a problem since the 1960s, so every government has been putting this off, and now suddenly we're in a crisis.
And what was interesting, though, in the article in The Times as well, it said they were looking at it again in 2019, we're going to do things 2020, but obviously 2020, 21, 22, the lockdown, COVID, lots of things were put on hold and not done. So other people are now looking again at another issue with lockdown, things that weren't done, all the maintenance.
This is so fundamental because you're literally talking about the building falling down. So in a way, this national audit is being done because people responsible for safety in those buildings, in those organisations, will be checking. But the secondary and equally more important piece, we must not have any disruption to young people's education because after lockdown, they've been set so far back, we need to help them catch up.
Well, it's happening in two schools in my constituency are affected. Thankfully, all the children are able to go to school, and the council and the school have worked wonders to try and make sure that happens. But I agree. And also, actually, my local hospital in Airedale is being rebuilt because of RAAC. So this is a bigger issue. Nigel, what story do you want to discuss?
I was looking at, it was a Labour FOI where they've been asking about bringing in midwives to cope with the lack of staff there. And they're getting paid sort of £1,000 a shift. In Yorkshire, they were paid £2,100 for a shift. Quite clearly, that's an unsustainable situation, that we are short 2,500 midwives. It's pretty important we start recruiting more to make sure this stops happening.
But I suppose it's difficult to recruit them if they think, well, I'm not going to get a full-time job, I can earn £1,000 a shift to do it by an agency. Isn't the solution for the NHS to cap the amount that they'll pay for an agency worker and say, look, because they're all doing it to go and work in the NHS. So if the NHS said, look, we're not going to pay more than £500 a shift, Would that not solve the problem? Because they'd either have to choose £500 or
not if they wouldn't turn up. I mean, if you need midwives...
But the locum situation has been going on for decades,
yes.
Getting thousands of pounds extra. I remember it many, many years ago. I remember dating a boyfriend 20, 30 years ago who was doing it. So this is nothing new, and it's a disgrace, by the way.
Unless the NHS cap this, it will continue to happen, because if you're one of these locums, just be clear, you're doing the right thing for you. There should be a cap on it, and until they put a cap on it, you simply will never solve the problem, because it makes financial sense.
And when people are going on strike, should we not have checked have any of these been doing locum shifts, extra shifts, getting extra money when they talk about it's the wage, that they're not getting a good enough wage?
Fair point. Just before we finish, I did promise another fun story for the second hour, and here it is, page 22 of The Sun. A man aged 113 insists the secret of a long life is never getting married. Headline is No Wife, Long Life. I should have met this chap before. Too late to meet this chap now, isn't it?
Me too.
Salvino Jesus Oliveres lived in the same house for 50 years. He benefited from a low-stress bachelor lifestyle. And they didn't recommend his diet. His relatives, apparently, he's a big fan of tucking into meat and lard. So maybe it's down to that. Do you think?
Yeah. I waited many years before I was hoodwinked into marriage, and now I'm ageing rapidly.
Have I cut my life expectancy down by
mine?
marrying you?
I know you've cut mine.
I'm at the other end of the scale. I don't think I could cope without my... I'm not interested in coping without my wife. The one bit, if he's in goings on, I do like is the idea of meat and lard. That sounds
meat
nice.
And lard, yeah. Well, you
nice.
can learn that bit of the lesson.
Definitely.
What do you think, Nigel? Do you
long life?
Well, I mean,
sacrificing?
All the surveys show that marriage actually gives you a long life.
Yes.
There's always exceptions, 113 years old. Same thing applies to smoking. Some people smoke and live to 100. I do both. I'm married, I smoke, so I'm looking forward to 120.
Well, did it say he had, like, a string of lovers or anything in this? No, just not married. You're not having a decadent life or anything.
He's very, very bored. Just on his own eating meat and lard.
His meat and lard is... Anyway. Sean, Nigel, thank you very much, as always.
And coming up, has Prince Harry gone too far with his latest whining? We'll be joined by royal expert Charles Ray, so don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's what we've been waiting almost 2 months for, but finally we've got a weekend with high pressure that's in charge. It's built its way in from the Atlantic and it's going to remain in place throughout Saturday and Sunday. Despite that, there has been a fair amount of cloud around first thing this morning. It is slowly clearing its way off and will allow more in the way of sunshine this afternoon, but some of the sunshine could be hazy at times. I'm afraid I can't rule out the odd shower across parts of England and Wales, but most of us should stay largely dry, and with light winds for many of us as well. It will be feeling pleasantly warm, climbing to highs of 25 degrees Celsius across the southeast, 21, 22 degrees central belts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. We'll be turning cloudier and breezier though for northwest Scotland as this area of rain begins to push its way in overnight. Could provide some heavy outbursts for the Isle of Lewis, parts of Shetland and Orkney as well. Elsewhere, a generally dry night, some clear spells, but mist and fog developing once again, particularly across central eastern areas of England, and quite a mild night for many of us, not dropping below 12 or 13 degrees Celsius in most towns and cities. Once that early mist and fog does clear its way off tomorrow, it should be a fairly fine day once again and a good dose of sunshine across the bulk of England and Wales. A bit cloudier for Northern Ireland and also still lingering rain and cloud across parts of northwest Scotland as well. Where you're in that shelter though, further east, 23 to 26 degrees Celsius possible. And it's only set to get warmer as we head towards the middle parts of next week, 29, perhaps 30 degrees Celsius. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
This September, the GB News family is back together. From breakfast, right across the day, breaking the latest stories, and every evening. And don't forget the weekend. We've got the whole of the UK covered. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country, with fun, lively and intelligent conversation with the biggest guests. This September, we'll meet Chris and John. Thank you for choosing GB News. We're proud to be Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:26. Lots of views coming in on all sorts of subjects. Esther?
Yeah, this one, we were talking about policing earlier, and actually the police need to be less woke and just put people behind bars. David said, as a gay man, it's very important that the police are seen to support the gay community. Why shouldn't the police, especially gay police, be seen to do that? Because we were talking about getting rid of badges and rainbows and what have you. But I think he's made a fair point.
Lots of comments about boarding schools. Dawn says, I went to a state boarding school in South Africa and I loved it. I was a third generation at the school. It gave me grounding, character, and I had the opportunity to play as much sport as I wanted and join every club.
And Paul said, I'm a child of the 50s and I remember when I was naughty, my parents would threaten me with boarding school. They never sent me there, but I guess that was the threat.
And Vivian says, I believe that abuse in all of its forms can be hidden in a boarding school environment, as there are no family members on hand to notice a child's mood changes. So, interesting.
And Piers was talking about that.
Interesting comments. Anyway, Prince Harry's back in the news again following the release of his latest documentary on Netflix. The Heart of Invictus delves competitors from the Invictus Games, which is held for wounded war veterans.
Joining us now to discuss Prince Harry's latest revelations is the former royal correspondent of The Sun, Charles Ray. Hello, morning, Charles. Maybe before we get there, we were talking about Mohammed Al-Fayed passed away this morning, and it seems that he went to his death always believing that crash wasn't an accident, but actually something that maybe, I don't know, the secret forces or something are doing, the Secret Service was doing.
Well, good morning, Esther and Philip. I mean, unfortunately for Mohammed, he went to his death continually believing that there was a conspiracy that killed the Princess of Wales, designed to kill her, and his son was collateral damage. And unfortunately, he kept on blaming members of the royal family, particularly Prince Philip, for being behind assassination attempts and so forth. And I think that when he continued to keep on referring to that, he lost an awful lot of public support. Look, anybody who loses particularly a child, and even though it's a grown-up child, you know, deserves all the sympathy they can get. But I mean, Mohammed did get sympathy when his son died with Diana, but I think that sympathy went away with his continual attacks on the royal family. You know, Mohammed Al Fayed is. You've had people on this morning. You've had Michael Cole on, who's supported him. You've had Ian Hamilton and David Miller this morning, who were on the other side. Mohammed Al Fayed was a very Marmite character. You either liked him or you loathed him. It's that simple. And unfortunately, it's 94 and he's now passed away.
Now, getting on to Harry, and Harry now seems to be a bit of a Marmite character. Prince Harry never, you know, he's meant to be talking about the Invictus Games, and he seems to be whining on about everything else. Does he need the money, Charles, or is he this so damaged, this is all he can talk about and vent spleen?
Well, I think you've got a bit of both there. He does need the money, and this Invictus Games documentary, this Heart of Invictus, interestingly, it has not even reached the top 10, whereas the other one did. But he's again moaning again about his lot. He's moaning again how needless to say, when he's having to go at the press. I don't care about him having to go at the press. He can do whatever he wants. But the press never supported soldiers, which is absolute rubbish. And he talks about how he didn't have a support network. Well, let me just tell you, Esther, he had a great support network. He was praising that support network in an interview he gave in 2017 to the Daily Telegraph, where he actually praised his brother for being there to help him. And he actually used the phrase, bless him. Now, this is the same brother who he talks and claims that was bullying him and was doing all sorts of things. He also had two excellent private secretaries, Jamie Lowther Pinkerton, an ex-SAS officer, and Ed Lane Fox. They were there. You know, if he had problems, he wasn't a child. He could go to wherever he wanted. You know, I feel sorry. I mean, I've got the greatest deal of respect for Harry for his military service and what he was before his marriage. And I'm not trying to blame Meghan for it, but all the ills. I'm not saying that at all. But certainly something has changed, and he's turned into just a moaner. And I'm afraid we're all getting a bit fed up with him just continually moaning and moaning about his family.
Charles, you couldn't be any straighter than that. Just very quickly about the story that Charles would have liked a daughter rather than another son, which was Harry. Do you think that's true or not?
Oh, it is true, because these allegations are not true. What is true, what is the new part, is the fact that these are the tapes that Diana herself recorded and were smuggled into Andrew Morton. And in these tapes, she says that, you know, Charles had said when Harry was born, oh, we both wanted a girl. Now, her mother, Frances Shankidd, snapped at him, so much so that they barely spoke after that. And Diana made the point that he rarely would do anything to anyone who stood up against him. And the other thing that she was saying as well in the tape says that her hatred for her stepmother, Rain Spencer, where she used to call her Acid Rain, or Rain, Rain, Go Away, and the pain in rain, and all you do. And I remember, I know this is true.
We're going to have to go to the news, but we're going to have you on next week or the week after, because you've got lots of things that you need to get out on GB News. Thank you.
All the best.
Yeah, great stuff. Coming up on Saturday Morning Live with Esther and Phil, what makes a killer? Is it innate nature, or is it how people are raised? We'll be joined by some psychologists to discuss it. You certainly won't want to miss that. But first of all, we're going to go to the news with Ray.
Thanks both. Just coming up to 11:33, our top stories this hour. There are calls for transparency following fears that public sites are at risk of collapsing because of aerated concrete. It's after the Department for Education told more than 100 schools and colleges to partially or fully close buildings as students prepare to return to class. Labour is demanding an urgent audit. Rail passengers are facing more disruption as train drivers take part in their latest strike action. Up to 20,000 RMT union members at 14 operators have walked out over pay and conditions. Meanwhile, members of the train drivers union ASLEF, who were on picket lines yesterday, are refusing to work overtime today. Tributes are being paid to former Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayed, who died at the age of 94. The family of the Egyptian-born businessman, who also owned Fulham FC for 16 years, says he passed away peacefully of old age. On its site, Fulham posted, "We owe Mohammed a debt of gratitude." And the government is looking at ways to make Botox safer. That's amid concerns about subpar procedures. It's launched an 8-week consultation with industry professionals and the public. Comes as an estimated 900,000 Botox injections are carried out in the UK each and every year. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, Welcome back. It's 11:38. Now, the crimes of the convicted serial killer Lucy Letby have rattled the UK and across the world.
You can think of nothing worse, can you, that babies who were grievously ill, killed or injured by a woman who was meant to care for them.
But are people born evil or are people made evil? Is it nature or nurture?
Well, we're joined now by two psychologists, Honey Lancaster-James and Joe Hemmings. So, if I start with you, Honey, are people born evil?
Well, this is one of those age-old debates. We've been talking about the nature-nurture debate now since the ancient Greeks. And the truth is, we're never going to have an absolutely definitive answer because you can't grow a human being in a vacuum. So it's very difficult to tease out what has been the impact of genetic, basic raw material and what has come from experiences in life. But over the last few years, there's been increasing evidence that even when there are so-called things like the psychopathic gene, various genetic studies, that actually in the vast majority of cases, when these things are investigated within the context of childhood experiences, development, there is actually a lot of evidence that suggests that even certain genes only turn on if they experience certain childhood influences, experiences and adversity. And there's been a huge growing body of evidence now that suggests that actually criminality is very strongly linked to early childhood experiences and adverse experiences in particular.
Honey, but, you know, Lucy was an only child of, a dad who has worked in retail, mum who was a bookkeeper. It seemed like a very ordinary life there. Lived down a cul-de-sac in a semi-detached house, went to local school, had a Saturday job. So where were these sort of pressures on her?
I mean, I can't comment on Lucy Letby's upbringing or her experiences. I haven't evaluated her. I haven't assessed her. So I can't comment on that. But what I can say is that lots of studies have looked at the populations within prisons, other criminality, and found huge links between early life trauma, early life experiences. That is not to excuse criminality, and that is not in any way to suggest that someone should be given dispensation because of experiences. It's also extremely complex because from the outside looking in, we can't look at anyone else's life and say, well, there's no reason for them to behave the way they are because it all looks very conventional and very glossy and very traditional 2.4 children in the family or whatever else. We can't do that because the reality of how our psychological processes work is that all sorts of influences from school days, parenting climate, poverty, social circumstances around us, they all play their part in influencing how we grow and how we develop. And it would be, I think, very sort of, we'd call it reductionist, very simplistic if we just say, well, somebody's just born that way without taking into account the vast array of psychological experiences that we all have in our lives. Of course, the vast majority of us then work on those things, process them, deal with them, cope with them. We don't all become murderers, and turn to criminality. But ultimately, I think it would be very simplistic to try to say that some people are just bad eggs in a bad apple, or a bad apple in a barrel. I don't think that's how we work.
Honey Lancaster-James, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Unfortunately, we lost Joe's link, so we weren't able to hear from her, but we appreciate your time. Jackie, one of our viewers, says, I was married to an evil man and had 3 daughters with him. I brought all my children up in exactly the same way and kept them away from their father's excesses, and they loved him. Unfortunately, my youngest is a reincarnation of her father. One day they might find the evil gene and we can put this debate to rest. And Christine says, I believe some people are born evil. They have some disorder in their brain, they don't understand empathy or have any awareness of pain. That's why they don't show remorse. I don't believe because you have suffered abuse, you go on to do the same in your life to others. If anything, you'd want to protect others from that pain and suffering that you have experienced. So that's what Jackie and Christine...
But you can definitely see the idea of a combination of the two. It could be a gene or whatever it is lying dormant, and if nothing triggers it, like that bad upbringing or bad treatment or some shock or some horror in her life, it may never manifest.
I'm not sure we're any closer to finding the answer to nature or nurture.
No, we're not. But it was still interesting to have that debate and conversation. Now, some of film's biggest stars have begun to arrive in Venice for the 80th Venice International Film Festival. Big names, including the Clooneys and Adam Driver, have been walking the red carpet alongside the famous backdrop of the Italian city's famous canals.
Well, join us to discuss all the latest festival news is Judita Da Silva, who's there live from Venice. Judita, thank you very much for joining us. You just always make us jealous as to whereabouts you are in the world at any particular time. What exciting gossip's going on there?
Oh, gosh. So it's been actually quite a busy few days. To think that despite the strikes, a lot of the big stars cannot come here because that would be seen as crossing picket lines. Some of the studios, this independent studios, have signed interim agreements. That's how we managed to get Adam Driver, Patrick Dempsey to walk the Lido and do the red carpet for Ferrari. And then we yesterday, poor things, we couldn't have Emma Stone, Mark Ruffalo or Willem Dafoe, but the director, Yorgos Lanthimos, people will remember his name because he directed The Favourite that made Olivia Colman an international superstar that she is today. So he did the press rooms, he did the red carpet. But I can tell you, like, some inside scoop that a lot of people, after watching Ferrari, are raving about Penelope Cruz. It's meant to be Adam Driver's movie, but everyone is saying, like, okay, Penelope is a scene stealer. She's done so well in Venice in the past years. She's won the Volpe Cup. She's got Best Actress. But this is another one to watch. So lots of people are talking about that. And aside from that, it's parties. And everyone's talking about Armani's party, Cartier's party, and Chanel's.
Well, I'm up for that. Which ones have you been going to? And have you seen anybody doing things they shouldn't have been doing with people they shouldn't have been doing it with?
So I've been to Netflix and Fox Searchlight Studios, and the Armani party was happening on the side of the Excelsior Hotel, which is pretty much the mothership of the whole festival. We saw Wes Anderson in his very funky pink suit walk into the bar, and it's like all the rivers of people parted for him. But then I think it's pretty much been the Clooneys. Everyone's been gaga for the Clooneys going to the DVF Awards. It's fashion central. Everyone's feeling very chic. Even in your pajamas, you just want to hold a cocktail and say, oh, Venice. That's what's going down. But I can't tell you the naughtiness. I'm taking it to the grave.
Are you gaga?
I'll be calling you later.
Are you gaga for George Clooney?
Well, I thought, if you don't mind me saying, I thought the Clooneys were sort of last year. I didn't think they'd still be hot property this year.
Oh, no. On the continent, everything is different. We talked about it in Cannes. What happens in America, what happens in the UK is one thing. Once you come to the continent, it's different rules. The Clooneys are very much hot property here. Everyone was excited to see them. But people are bubbling about Priscilla Presley because, remember, the Elvis movie started in festivals, did amazingly well. Lisa Marie Presley and Priscilla promoted it. Lisa Marie has passed away. Priscilla is here to promote the movie Priscilla, which is about her. So everyone is really keen to see her do her thing.
Judita Da Silva.
I just want any end to the strike. Do you think is the strike going to come to an end, or is this rumbling on for a long time to come?
They still see it's going to be going on for months. Everyone's worried it's going to domino into award season. But from what everyone's talking about, it's in the press rooms, they're at an impasse and no one's giving in. But it's a time for independent movies to shine. So that's a great thing that they've wanted for years.
Judita Da Silva, thank you for breaking off from the parties for long enough to speak to us this morning. We appreciate it. I'm still getting over the idea of film stars being scabs for crossing picket lines. It seems a strange one to me. But
anyway, we're joined now with Saturday morning favourites, and that's Aidan McGee and Hayley Palmer, who'll be bringing us up to speed with the latest showbiz in this country and sports too. So I don't know where to start. I'm going to start with you, Hayley, with Joe Wicks.
Oh, yes. So I've been reading in the paper this week that he's decided to take his daughter, who's 5 years old, out of school. So she's done 1 year in school, and now he says he's spending a lot of time in America and he wants to spend time with his kids. But there's been a lot of backlash on Instagram and in the press saying, is it like kind of a selfish thing to do? But I don't know. I'm kind of like, it's 2023. Anything goes these days. As long as he's sticking to, obviously, the guidelines of homeschooling and stuff, I don't actually see that much of a...
Oh, yeah, we had a big debate on boarding school. Maybe that isn't the way forward. It seems that it's traumatised a lot of people. I wanted to go to boarding school. Phil did go to a state boarding school. But lots of people now, I say lots, about 75,000 people are homeschooling their children for various reasons. They're thinking the school isn't doing it right for me. Since lockdown and kids not being in school, other people are. Could be religious reasons, various other things. But, you know, if you're a child star, if you're in the movies or what have you, be homeschooled or you'd get sort of...
Exactly. So I don't think it's forever. I think it's just because he needs to do some work in America and stuff. She's 5 years old, but he has 2 other kids as well. But I just think, actually, life skills are more important. Like, I think in schools they should teach you more about how to deal with different people, how to react to things. I think there's other things that should be taught in schools that aren't.
Children seem to be wagging the dog a bit here, don't they, in terms of these things? Claudia Winkleman's children, they seem to have a lot to say, don't they? About...
Yeah, they said that they were embarrassed by their mum presenting Strictly, but, like, that's the most... like, amazing job in the world, surely. But I do think sometimes when you have a parent that is in the public eye, then maybe sometimes if your mum's on telly kissing someone in Emmerdale or something, that could be embarrassing when you go to school, couldn't it? Or being on X Factor and... Not Strictly. Come on, we're not having that.
I think you go into school and brag about that if your mum was doing Strictly.
Totally, yeah.
Got to get you on Strictly, Hayley. We've got to get you on Strictly.
Got the jazz hands.
You're a dancer, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I can still do the splits on a night out.
Aidan, could we tempt you on to Strictly?
Yeah, without doubt. Yeah, I haven't got many moves, but you can learn it. That's the whole point, isn't it? You'd teach me, wouldn't you?
No.
Oh, yeah.
I think you're unteachable.
Yeah, I'm not unteachable. How do you know? You've not seen me move. You've not seen me move.
I can tell.
I think you've got natural rhythm.
You reckon?
No, he hasn't.
There you go.
Transfer deadline day yesterday. Yep. Big thing, obviously, Esther's pleased about, I guess, in some respects, is that Mo Salah's for now staying at Liverpool. What do you make of that? I thought it was... I would have sold him.
Look, £150 million for a 31-year-old player. Liverpool are nominally trying to sell this club at the moment. They put it up for sale. They put feelers out around about last autumn time because the cost of borrowing has gone up so much. Now, £150 million for a 31-year-old player, it must have been a difficult decision to make. However, it may not be over, as Harry Redknapp alluded to in the last hour. The Saudi Arabian deadline doesn't end until September the 7th, and that's Jurgen Klopp's main complaint. It means that you can't buy players until this point, yesterday, but you can sell players until then. If they come back with £200 million on Tuesday, Phil, or on Wednesday, let's see how strong Liverpool are.
It's interesting. We've put a poll out on this as well. If you'd have been sort of Klopp, would you have accepted the £150 million bid for 31-year-old Mo Salah? What did our viewers say? 56% said yes, they would have accepted it. 34% no, they wouldn't have accepted it, and 10% said we'd be holding out for more money, so maybe that's what he's doing.
He'd be on £2 million a week he'd be earning over in terms of his salary.
Why did they not put a bid in earlier, and then Liverpool could have got a replacement before the transfer deadline? They probably would have sold him. Well, why have they left it?
I think they were trying to work... I think Salah himself was trying to work out if he wanted to go, because it was mooted some weeks ago. These discussions didn't start yesterday. But I think he wanted to work out whether he wanted to actually be in the league, because it's a vast downgrade from where you are in terms of the competition. But, you know, to go from 300 grand a week to £2 million a week, it's not bad money, and it's tax-free.
I could cope with that. National Television Awards?
Yes.
You're going, I think?
I'm going. It's Tuesday night. You can tune in ITV, 8 o'clock. It's going to be hosted by Joel Dommett again this year. And it's at the O2, not Wembley, because last year it was Wembley. It used to actually be in January, the National Television Awards, and it was freezing cold. You'd literally be like, oh, my goodness.
You're going to invite me to that, won't you?
No, you don't quite cut the grade.
You're not doing well today.
Anyway, get the hint, but we have...
It wasn't good for all of the dressers, are you saying, and everybody...
I mean, it was freezing cold, but this year it's going to be apparently a heatwave next week, so it's going to be great. Now...
Do the splits?
Definitely not going to keep it classy, Phil. That's me. Now, best daytime, it's between Lewisham and The Chase, the repair shop this morning. I'm going to put it out there. It's going to be The Chase. He's going to win. And actually, what happened to Esther and Phil's show?
Oh, well, thank you.
Good point. I nominated it.
Should we go along with you and shout?
Yeah, I think they missed that off the list.
What about Esther and Phil? Good point.
Totally. And TV presenter Alison Hammond, Ant and Dec, Bradley Walsh, Claudia Winkleman, Martha Lewis, and Hayley Palmer. Just put it out there to the universe for next year.
Keep telling yourself.
Any sports apart from on the transfer deadline going on US Open tennis?
Yeah, we've got Katie Bolter in action tonight. Leicestershire-born, 27 years old. Horrific time with injury in the last 4 years or so. She's forced her way back into the top 100, and she's playing against Peyton Stearns tonight at 11 o'clock of the USA. And who knows, she might... I mean, it's only the first week, but we still do have other British interests as well, Jack Draper and Cam Norrie. We'll see what she can do tonight. I might stay up and watch it.
And do we think Djokovic is going to win, or...?
I think this is going to be the eminent rivalry of the latter stages of Djokovic's career against Alcaraz. He got through yesterday, Djokovic, in 5 sets. I don't like it when top players face 5-setters too early in the tournament. It means they're going to get probably worn out. But Djokovic is such an amazing athlete, I wouldn't put it past winning him there again.
Are you a tennis fan, Hayley?
Yeah, I'm actually quite good.
At playing?
Yeah, I am.
Watching?
Watching.
I heard you took backhanders.
Generally are playing as well.
No, I am actually quite good because I have had lessons before and I actually really got into it. But I don't like actually playing a game. I just like to hit the ball, that's it.
Hayley, Aidan, thank you very much indeed. As always, we've now learned that Hayley's brilliant at watching tennis but not playing it.
And the splits.
Yeah, and the splits.
And the splits.
Anyway, that's it from us. Before it gets out of hand, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. But up next, it's GB News Saturday with the marvellous Martin Daubney. Martin, what have you got coming up on the show today?
I love you, Esther and Phil. You're like Richard and Judy, but without the booze. Coming up on GB News Saturday at 12 till 3, I'll be asking the big question. Concrete Gate rumbles on. Labour are blaming the Tories, but as it emerges, this was red flagged 28 years ago. Why didn't Labour do anything about it either? Secondly, ULEZ has rolled out and expanded this year. Over 500 cameras have been vandalised. I'll be asking the big question, is this salvation or just taxation? And finally, more net zero madness as it emerges. Homeowners will find £15,000 for owning the wrong sort of boiler. And I'll be asking what kind of country welcomes illegal immigrants as VIPs and yet will jail homeowners. That's GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney, 12 till 3 p.m. But first, here's your weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It's what we've been waiting almost 2 months for, but finally we've got a weekend with high pressure that's in charge. It's built its way in from the Atlantic and it's going to remain in place throughout Saturday and Sunday. Despite that, there has been a fair